Hello everyone and welcome to the semifinals of the losers bracket of the Chessable Masters. It is Magnus Carlsen versus Levon Aronian, and they are playing for a chance to play against Hikaru Nakamura in the finals of the losers bracket of the Chessable Masters. Now that's a weird thing to say, but that's how they do things there. And the winner of the finals of the losers bracket will face Fabiano Caruana in the grand final of the winners bracket. So there we have it. Let's check it out. This is the first rapid game of the Magnus versus Levon match. It's a very cool game. They play some very old school chess lines that are used in this game are over 100 years old. They date back over like to the times of Alekhine and Capablanca. So you guys will enjoy this game. The positions that happen are very enjoyable. So Magnus with the white pieces opens with pawn to c4. He goes for the English opening. We have knight to f6 by Levon, knight to c3, e5, knight to f3, and now knight to c6. The four knights of the English opening. We have d4, and now pretty much everyone plays e captures on d4. It's pretty mandatory, as it's the only move that says is okay for black. All the other moves the engine says are either equal or just straight up better for black. But here we have e4 by Levon, and this is the so-called Bradley Beach variation. Now it's a funky name. I've never heard about it, so of course I went to check why it's called the Bradley Beach variation, and they had two very strong tournaments at Bradley Beach, one in 1929, one in 1928, one in 1929. The one that I've checked where the variation got its name from is the year Alexander Alekhine visited that tournament, and he won the tournament with 8.5 out of 9, something like that. And the first game I checked where Alekhine had the black pieces, he faced a gentleman named Horace Ransom Bigelow. Alekhine went for this e4 pawn push, and he won a great game with it. In that game, Horace Bigelow went for knight to e5, which is considered a suboptimal move, only the second top move recommended by the engine. But of course here Magnus knows better. He plays knight back to d2, which is of course the first top move recommended by the engine, and the game continues. And also I did not notice the return match between Alexander Alekhine and Jose Raul Capablanca was supposed to be played in Bradley Beach, so I did not know that. I knew, of course, that there were negotiations for the rematch to happen, but it never happened. If it did happen, it would be played here in Bradley Beach. So I know that. Maybe some of you guys didn't know that either. So okay, knight to d2. Magnus goes for the top line against this. We have bishop to b4, and now pawn to e3. We have bishop captures, b captures, and now Levon just castles. And here we reach the position from the thumbnail. It's a very standard pawn structure with sort of resembling something that could come from an Imzo-Indian, but there's this e4 pawn kind of blockading white's setup. But okay, here Magnus goes for pawn to g4, and he wants to play g5, attack the knight, and attack the black king. And of course, it is now as of move 8 that we have a completely new game, because g4 has never been attempted here. We have d6, and now pawn to g5. Levon goes for knight to d7, and knight captures on e4. Magnus wins the pawn, but Levon says, okay, it's not a problem. My king is already castled to safety. I'm just going to play f5. Your king is stuck on e1. I'm just going to attack it, and I should have a great game here. And okay, g captures on f6 en passant, knight captures, and knight back to g3 by Magnus. So can Magnus's king survive here on e1? We have queen to e8 by Levon. Now the queen is nicely positioned on the e-file, but also you can just shift the queen to g6 to f7 or wherever you need. Pawn to f3, not allowing the knight any funky squares, and also preparing e4 in some lines. We have b6, now preparing bishop to b7, and as Magnus of course doesn't like this, he immediately puts the rook on g1. There's a semi-open g-file, so the rook definitely belongs there. Knight to a5, putting pressure on the c4 pawn, and now pawn to e4. Magnus grabs the full center, not worried about his king being on e1. We have king to h8 by Levon. He's ready to open up the possession, but before that he wants to get the king off of the g file and off of this diagonal. At some point it might become relevant. So king to h8, and now bishop to d3. Magnus playing pretty much in the same way as if his king was already castled, but it's not. It's still on e1. So okay, knight to h5. Levon now offers to trade knights, and queen to e2. nicely putting the queen on the e-file. We have knight to f4, now forcing Magnus to give up his bishop pair, as he's either going to pick up the light square bishop, or Magnus has to give up the dark square bishop. So bishop captures, we have rook captures on f4, and now queen to e3, attacking the rook on f4. We have rook back to f8, and now pawn to c5. A very tricky move by Magnus, and also just showing you how he doesn't care about his king being on e1. He just wants to open up the position because it's positionally good for him to do so. So here b captures on c5. We have d captures on c5, voluntarily breaking up his strong center. Queen to e5, now putting pressure on this pawn here, and now comes knight to e2. The queen to e5 also attacks the c3 pawn, so Magnus just defends it, and now queen captures on c5. And look at this, queen captures on c5, d captures on c5, and all of a sudden we've reached an endgame with equal material. It's just that Levon's c pawn is doubled, so Magnus definitely has the upper hand here. We have king f2, Magnus wants to bring his king closer to the action, bishop to e6, and now just rook to g5. How can Levon defend the c5 pawn? Well, he could play at knight b7. It's a weird move, and the knight probably won't be able to stay there forever, but you know, you could try this. Levon, on the other hand, goes for the active plan. Rook a to d8 puts pressure on the bishop, and now, well, you would expect king to e3 from Magnus. Magnus, in fact, goes bishop to b5, and this allows Levon a very tricky move that would not be possible if you just kept the bishop here and play king to e3, but you know, you give Levon one chance to wiggle out, he's gonna do it. And here he plays pawn to a6. He gives up this pawn in order to save this pawn and get a lot of activity. So look at this, bishop captures on a6, rook to a8, the bishop goes back to d3, and now you could actually play c4 because the knight is now nicely covered by the rook, but no, Levon goes knight to b3, attacks the rook, and of course captures is impossible because of rook captures rook. So here rook to d1, and now rook captures on a2. We have king to e3, as the knight cannot move, so you don't want to run into any tactics. King to e3, and now just pawn to h6. We have rook to e5, and now bishop to f7. And again, material balance has been restored, and Levon likes his position. He has a very active position, but objectively, Magnus's position is much better here. The pawns are still weak, and Magnus's pieces are very active, or they soon will be. So bishop to f7 is really a funny looking move. Magnus tries to take advantage of it. Rook to f7. Now you have to be worried about something like bishop to c4 here. So knight to a5, stopping that, and now rook captures on c5. So Magnus starts collecting here. We have pawn to c6, and now pawn to h4. Now the knight can move. You don't have to worry about that pawn on h2. Rook to a3, and now we have knight to d4. And here Levon really out of options here. Not a lot of active moves. He goes for knight to c4 check, and he gives up two pieces for the rook, and that's how he will try to hold this. And okay, Magnus accepts. Rook captures on c4, bishop captures on c4, bishop captures, and now rook captures on c3 with check. Magnus blocks this with bishop to d3, and now it's 3 pawns each. However, Magnus does have a bishop and knight against the rook, and with perfect play, of course, you should win this. So let's see how he does it. Rook to d8, knight to e2 now, attacking the rook, and the bishop on d3 is sufficiently defended. So rook to e3, Levon is now dreaming of some c5, c4 action. Knight to f4 by Magnus. We have pawn to c5, and now, of course, c4 would be winning for black, but rook to c1, Magnus stops it. We have pawn to g5, captures, and now just knight to d5. Now the rook is cut off from attacking the bishop on d3, and Magnus can start moving his pieces around a little bit. We have rook to c8, and now knight to c3. We have king to g7. Levon starts bringing his king into the game. Knight to b1. Attacks the rook on a3, rook to a2, and now knight to d2. And now you have full control over the c4 square, and you have no longer have to worry about Levon actually pushing c4. So king to f6, knight to c4. We all know the best way to blockade a passed pawn is by putting a nice on a square in front of it. Rook to b8 now, and now rook to h1, trying to get some action behind the black king. King to g7, and now of course pawn to e5, opening up this diagonal. Now rook to h7 is coming, so Levon stops this, offers a rook trade, and while Magnus could do it, he keeps the tension. Rook to g1 puts pressure on the pawn here. Rook to h5, not a very active square for the black rook, but Levon is very low on time. He doesn't have all that much time to choose. Knight to d6, and now rook to a3, not allowing the bishop to move. So of course king to e4, and now rook to h4 with check. Magnus blocks it with rook to g4, and now king to f8. You could also consider a move like a rook captures and then f captures on g4, which would of course still be completely winning for white, but every other option is also winning for white, so you don't really gain all that much. King to f8 was played with bishop to c4, and now rook captures on g4. We have f captures and now rook to g3, going after the g3 pawn, but now king to f5, and now you can see that the squares around the black king will become thinner and thinner. This covered, this covered, this covered, this covered. This will soon be covered once the black king gets here, and then it's merely a matter of pushing the passed pawn to victory. So rook to e3. Levon has one more plan, or one small vial of poison to try and use against Magnus. King to f6, and now rook f3 check, knight to f5, and now rook to f4, attacking the g4 pawn and the bishop on c4, and it seems that the pawn will fall and Levon will get his counterplay. However, here Magnus just played pawn to e6, and he was in this position on move 59 that Levon Aronian resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. That's one way to do it. Even a trickier way to do it is bishop to f7. Now this is just unstoppable checkmate. You will have to give up the rook in order to stop this, like rook captures on g4, e6, rook to e4, e7, and now you have to captures, and of course you are completely winning its mate on the next move regardless of what black plays. But Magnus played pawn to e6, and it's pretty much the same thing. Point is that once the bishop is captured, you have e7 with check, and once the king hits e8, now you deliver a check. You can go knight g7 check, you can go knight to d6 check, doesn't matter. Black king will have to move, and you will queen that pawn with check, and then win the rook pretty much on the next move, or maybe in a couple of moves. But now of course it's completely winning for white. So yeah, very nicely done by Magnus. And I've just learned, looking at my other screen, that the second game between Magnus and Levon has finished, which means that and of course Magnus won the second game as well, which means that now we will have Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura in the finals of the losers bracket of the Chessable Masters, and the winner will face Fabiano Caruana in the grand final of the Chessable Masters Division 1. I know. What are you gonna do? So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Very nicely done by Magnus. Levon, not his day, but if you're playing against Magnus, you can't always have your day. I would like to thank Ravishing Reptiles YouTube, Eric Holtman, Ivan Sterling, Phil Kessler, Tax Guru, and Joshua Hadley for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.